My son was paralyzed for 5 years after saving his daughter from an accident. But one day, my daughter-in-law and I took him to the hospital for a checkup. She stepped out to answer a call, and suddenly the doctor, trembling, whispered, "Call the police immediately. Your daughter-in-law is—" He couldn't finish the sentence. She walked back into the room, holding something in her hand. But before we continue, check if you are subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know how far our revenge stories reach. The air in Dr. Miller's private office was so cold, it made me uneasy. Valerie, my daughter-in-law, and I had just pushed the wheelchair carrying Michael, my son, into the room. Valerie gave the nurse a perfect smile. Michael sat motionless in the chair. His eyes were open, but his gaze was distant, empty. The strong, athletic body he once had was now just a shadow of the past, thin, weak, completely dependent on the care of others. Dr. Miller was a young man who had just taken over Michael's case after the previous doctor retired. He flipped through the pages of my son's thick medical file, frowning from time to time, with an unreadable expression that twisted my stomach. The checkup went as usual. When the exam was over, the doctor looked up, glanced at Valerie, and said in a professional tone, "Ma'am, please, could you go to reception and get a copy of the blood work from 6 months ago? The nurse forgot to attach it to the file." I saw a flash of annoyance cross Valerie's face. She sighed, but quickly covered it with her usual smile. "Of course, doctor, I'll go right now," she said, and left the room. The sound of her heels echoed down the hall until it faded. The moment the door closed, Dr. Miller shot up from his chair. He walked quickly to the door and locked it from the inside. The click of the bolt echoed in the silent room, and my heart jumped, beating wildly. What was happening? I looked at him, full of questions, with a growing fear tightening in my chest. The young doctor turned to me. His face no longer held its professional calm, but extreme tension. He approached quickly and whispered, his voice low but firm and alarmed, "Your son's most recent blood test results are very strange. The levels of a very strong sedative are several times over the legal limit. Listen to me. Call the police immediately. Your daughter-in-law is—" His words were cut off. At that instant, the doorknob turned sharply from the outside. Valerie's impatient voice came through the door. "Doctor, the door is locked. Are you in there?" Dr. Miller flinched. He backed away, as if he had been shocked. The panic on his face was obvious. He hurried to the door and, with trembling hands, unlocked it. The door opened almost immediately, as if Valerie had been waiting right there. She walked in, with a folder in one hand, and in the other, a small white paper bag with the building's pharmacy logo. A shiver ran down my spine. I was sure she wasn't carrying that bag when we arrived. The doctor's demeanor changed instantly. He cleared his throat, straightened up, and spoke in a loud, confident voice, completely hiding his previous nervousness. Apologies. I have a habit of locking the door while reviewing files, to ensure patient privacy. All of Michael's indicators are stable. There is nothing to worry about." I tried to keep my face calm, but I could feel my fingers trembling on the edge of my son's wheelchair. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking, and asked as naturally as possible, "What's in the bag, dear?" Valerie smiled, a smile so bright it was almost blinding. She held up the bag and shook it slightly. "Oh, nothing, Mom." I just felt a little tired. I asked the doctor for some vitamins. "Lately, with all this taking care of Michael, I've been losing sleep, very stressed." As if to confirm her words, Dr. Miller nodded. He handed Valerie an already signed prescription, which clearly indicated the name of a vitamin complex and a common sleeping pill. During the whole exchange, he avoided looking me in the eye. His gaze shifted away, as if he feared a single glance could reveal the horrible secret he had just hinted at. I looked at the prescription and then at the paper bag. A mother's instinct, sharpened by years of worry and sleepless nights, was screaming at me that something was terribly wrong. Whatever was in that bag, it definitely was not vitamins. On the way home, Valerie was strangely cheerful. She put on some upbeat pop song. She tapped her fingers to the rhythm on the steering wheel and hummed the melody. The sound pierced my ears like poison. Her fake joy contrasted cruelly with the image of my son sitting motionless beside her. Dr. Miller's words kept ringing in my mind, mixing with the music, forming a chaotic and terrifying symphony. My mind drifted, traveling back to a sunny afternoon 5 years ago, the afternoon that changed our lives forever. Back then, I was in my kitchen, flooded with the warm light of dusk. The smell of garlic and rosemary frying in olive oil filled the air, mixing with the aroma of the roast lamb sizzling in the oven. It was Michael's favorite meal, and I made it for him every time he came for dinner. My hands moved skillfully as I tossed the salad, filled with simple happiness. In a few minutes, the whole family would be together. Michael's laughter and my granddaughter Emily's little voice would fill the house again. Just then, the phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, it's me." My son's voice sounded warm and happy. "I'm on my way to your house." "I'm just a few blocks away. I also bought that rye bread you like." I smiled, feeling a deep warmth in my chest. "That's wonderful, son. Don't rush. Everything is almost ready." After hanging up, I called Valerie. I knew she had promised to bring Emily, my granddaughter, for dinner. Emily was the fruit of the love between Michael and his first wife, a sweet young woman who had died of breast cancer. The girl was Michael's entire world, his reason for going on. "Hello, Mom?" Valerie answered the phone. Her voice rushed. "Valerie, I'm calling to remind you to bring Emily. Her dad is almost here." "Ugh, I completely forgot," she answered, sounding flustered. "I'm at the spa with some friends. I'm not going to make it. But look, I'm just going to drop the girl off at the corner, at the intersection. Can you go out and get her for me? I'm in a huge hurry." I didn't even have time to protest. To tell her how dangerous it was to leave a 5-year-old girl alone on such a busy corner, because Valerie had already hung up. A wave of uneasiness washed over me, but I calmed myself thinking it was just a few steps to the corner. I looked out the kitchen window, just as Michael's silver car pulled up in front of the house, my heart filled with joy. But that joy froze instantly. Across the street, I saw the small silhouette of Emily, standing alone on the sidewalk, clutching a rag doll. The girl looked around, confused. When she saw her father's car, her eyes lit up. She screamed with excitement, her pure, loving voice cutting through the glass. "Daddy!" And without thinking, she ran into the street. Everything happened in suffocating, slow motion. A loud truck horn blared, desperate and deafening. From around the corner, a blue cargo truck, huge as a steel monster, was approaching at a terrifying speed. I only managed to let out a choked scream, a cry that got stuck in my throat, dry and helpless. Michael, my son, who had just gotten out of the car, didn't even have time to notice me watching. The instinct of a father, of a hero, overrode all thought. Without a second of hesitation, my son launched himself like an arrow. With all the strength of his robust body, he violently pushed Emily back onto the sidewalk just before the truck passed. A sharp, terrible crash shattered the afternoon calm. I saw my son's body thrown into the air, spinning uncontrollably, and landing hard on the hot asphalt. The grocery bags he had just bought scattered everywhere. A carton of milk burst open, and the white liquid mixed with the blood that was spreading further and further beneath his body. At the hospital, Valerie was the last to arrive. She ran into the emergency room, her clothes impeccable, reeking of the strong citronella scent from her spa. her face perfectly made up, without a single smudge. As soon as she saw Michael lying motionless in the bed, covered in tubes and machines, she let out a heartbreaking scream and collapsed on the floor. "It was my fault. Oh my God, it's all my fault." She cried and writhed, repeating her laments over and over. She crawled to the bed, took Michael's limp hand, and swore through her tears that she would take care of him for the rest of his life. That scene was so perfect that for a moment I almost believed in her pain. But then, in the midst of the chaos, when the elderly doctor came out of the operating room with a tired face and announced that Michael's condition was critical, I saw something, a fleeting moment, but one that burned into my memory forever. Valerie stopped crying. She looked up at the doctor, and for a second, when she thought no one was watching, her face went blank. Her eyes were cold, without a hint of sadness, without a trace of worry, just a disturbing calm. Like the frozen surface of a lake in winter, as soon as she noticed me staring at her, her expression changed instantly. The suffering and despair returned, even more intense than before. But it was too late. I had seen it. The seed of doubt was planted at that very moment, when I met Valerie's empty eyes in the hospital, a week after the accident. When Michael was moved from the intensive care unit back home, I knew I couldn't leave him alone. I packed a few changes of clothes in a suitcase, left my quiet house, and moved in with them. Valerie greeted me at the door with a radiant smile and a tight hug. "What a relief to have you here." "Mom, now we can share the burden," she said, in a voice as sweet as honey. But her actions told another story. The room she gave me was the guest room, at the end of the hall, as far as possible from Michael's bedroom. A calculated arrangement, a silent message reminding me that I was just a guest in my own son's house, and that there were boundaries I shouldn't cross. On the outside, Valerie seemed like the perfect wife. Every morning she got up before dawn, moving stealthily in the kitchen to prepare Michael's breakfast. The smell of oatmeal woke me up every day, but there was one thing she never let me help with: preparing his medicine. At every meal, Valerie would carefully take out the blister packs of different colored pills. She ground each one with a small porcelain mortar and pestle until they were a fine powder in a separate bowl, and then mixed them into his oatmeal. The constant sound of the mortar and pestle became a disturbing melody in the house. One time, seeing her looking tired, I told her, "Let me help you grind the medicine. You go rest for a bit." Valerie immediately waved her hand, with a slightly tense smile. "No, Mom, I'm used to it. Michael's medicines are very complicated. There are so many. And if you make a mistake with the dose, it would be a problem." She spoke softly, but her message was clear. This was her territory, and I was not to interfere. The physical therapist came 3 times a week. In front of him, Valerie was always attentive and sweet. She would hold Michael's hand and whisper tender words to him. "Come on, love. You're doing so well. You can almost move your finger." But as soon as the door closed behind the therapist, that face disappeared. If Michael complained of pain after therapy, Valerie would take a small, white pill from a medicine cabinet, one that wasn't on any prescription. "It's a special painkiller the doctor prescribed just for you," she would say, and carefully put it in his mouth. And it was always the same. 15 minutes after taking it, Michael would fall into a deep, strange sleep until late at night. His health wasn't improving. On the contrary, it was getting worse every day. His skin, once tan and healthy, became pale and waxy. Sometimes, while I was talking to him and telling him stories, he would suddenly fall asleep, his eyes closing abruptly. But what destroyed me most was one afternoon when I was cleaning his face. Michael opened his eyes, stared at me with an unfamiliar expression, and asked, "Who are you?" That question was like a knife straight to my heart. I froze. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Valerie ran in, waving her hands and smiling nervously. "He's just tired. Mom, it's nothing." The doctor said it's a normal symptom for patients with a brain injury. She said the word normal with such indifference, as if my son not recognizing his own mother was of no importance. Valerie's coldness wasn't just with Michael. I noticed it with Emily, too. Once a cheerful girl, she started to become quiet, reserved, her eyes always sad. One day, Emily ran out with a fresh drawing to show Valerie. It was a clumsy drawing, but full of color. It showed 3 people holding hands under the sun. "Look, Valerie, I drew our family," she said happily. Valerie barely glanced at it and muttered, "That's nice," before turning her back and telling her, "Go to your room and tidy up your toys." That night, as I was taking out the trash, my heart sank when I saw Emily's drawing, a symbol of her innocent hope, crumpled at the bottom of the bin. Then, money started to be a problem. Valerie constantly complained about the cost of Michael's medicines, diapers, and medical equipment, saying everything was outrageously expensive. She started asking me for money from my small retirement savings, always with a look of suffering. "I'm sorry, Mom, but it's for Michael." One morning, the delivery man brought a large box of medical supplies. Valerie quickly signed for it, paid with a wad of cash, and took the box to the basement, locking the door. But she was careless. An invoice from the shipment slipped out from under the door without her noticing. Curious, I picked it up. It was the invoice for that exact box, but the amount was only half of what Valerie had told me the night before that she needed to pay for it. I held the paper with trembling hands and sat in the living room to wait for Valerie. When she came out, I showed her the invoice. "Valerie, can you explain this?" Valerie's face showed a moment of confusion. Her eyes darted nervously, looking for an escape, but she quickly regained her composure and forced a smile. "Oh, they must have put an old invoice in by mistake. Mom, look, you can't even see the date clearly. Don't worry, I manage the accounts very carefully." With that, she snatched the invoice from my hands and tore it into tiny pieces right in front of me, as if trying to erase any proof of her guilt. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scattered fragments began to fit together in my head. The cold look in the hospital, the obsessive control of the medications, the mysterious white pill, Michael's constant decline, the drawing thrown in the trash, and now the lie about the money. I turned on the TV mindlessly, hoping the noise would chase away the dark thoughts. Just then, a news report came on about a Black Widow case, a woman who had slowly poisoned her husband to get his fortune. When the camera zoomed in on the woman's face, her smile superimposed itself in my mind with Valerie's sweet smile. A chill ran down my spine. I barely slept that night, lying in bed, listening to every sound in the house. The next morning, I made a huge effort to appear calm. I went down to the kitchen as Valerie was making breakfast. The same smell of oatmeal as always, and the sound of the mortar and pestle echoed in the air. I pretended to look for something in my purse. "Oh, how awful!" I exclaimed, with an annoyed voice. "I left my glasses at Dr. Miller's office. I can't see a thing without them." Valerie, busy mixing a white powder into Michael's oatmeal, barely looked up. "Oh, really? Then go get them, but come back soon. Emily will be home from school, and we need to make her lunch." She spoke with total naturalness, without a hint of suspicion. To her, I was nothing more than a forgetful old woman. That confidence was my opportunity. I left the house in a hurry, but instead of going up to the 3rd floor where the office was, I ducked into a corner of the 1st floor hallway and, trembling, took out my phone. I found Dr. Miller's private number on the card he had given me the day before. My heart pounded as the phone rang. "Miller speaking." His voice sounded professional. though a bit cautious. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. "Doctor, this is the mother of your patient, Michael Thompson. I wanted to ask you more about the side effects of the medication you mentioned yesterday." I emphasized those words, hoping he would understand my hint. There was a silence for a few seconds. I could hear him inhale slowly. "I understand. Where are you?" "In the hospital lobby." "Go to the Cornerstone Cafe across from the hospital. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up. The cafe was crowded and noisy, with the aroma of roasted coffee and sweet bread floating in the air. I chose a secluded table where I could watch the entrance. Exactly 15 minutes later, Dr. Miller walked in. He had taken off his white coat and was wearing a simple shirt. He looked less tense, but his eyes still reflected concern. He saw me right away and sat down across from me. Without beating around the bush, he took out his phone, opened a file, and showed it to me. "These are the results of your son's toxicology screening." I stared at the screen. Numbers, chemical formulas, and symbols I didn't understand. The doctor pointed to a line with a long, complicated name. "Clonazepam." His voice became grave, heavy with indignation. "It's a very potent tranquilizer, part of the benzodiazepine group, normally used to treat seizures or acute panic attacks. It does not appear on any of your son's prescriptions." "And the amount accumulated in his blood," he said, hesitating for a moment as he looked me straight in the eyes, "is so high that it could be life-threatening. If this dose continues to be administered for a prolonged time, it will cause liver failure, irreversible kidney failure, permanent brain damage, and eventually, respiratory arrest in his sleep." Every word he spoke landed on me like a heavy blow. I felt my entire body go cold. The coffee cup in my hands began to tremble. The liquid spilled onto the porcelain saucer. Everything around me blurred, and only the doctor's voice and the horrific truth he had just revealed remained. My daughter-in-law wasn't just weakening Michael. She was killing him, little by little, right in front of my eyes. Dr. Miller leaned forward and took my trembling hands in his. His palms were warm, giving me a little strength. "Mrs. Thompson," he said urgently, "this is no longer a medical issue. This is a criminal case. You have to call the police, right now, before it's too late." I left the cafe walking like a sleepwalker. The midday sun was strong, but it couldn't warm the chill that had seeped into my bones. Aimlessly, I walked into a small nearby park and collapsed onto a bench under the shade of a tree. My hands were shaking so badly. I had to dial 3 times before I could reach Carter, my friend from high school, the only person I could trust. Now he was a police inspector with years of experience in our city. When he answered, all the composure I had left shattered. I cried silently, with sobs that barely let me speak. "Carter, it's me. Sarah," I barely managed to say. "Help Michael. Please, save my son." His voice, deep and calm, sounded on the other end with a steadiness that held me. There was no surprise, just genuine concern. He immediately sensed my desperation. "Sarah, calm down. Where are you? Stay right there. Don't move. I'm on my way." He didn't ask any more questions. He acted. In less than 10 minutes, his old truck pulled up next to the park. Inside that safe space, I told him everything, through tears. I recounted every detail, the suspicions from 5 years ago, the mysterious white pill, the torn invoice, and Dr. Miller's terrifying words. Carter listened in silence, his rough hands resting on the steering wheel. His face hardened, the wrinkles by his eyes deepening. When I finished, he put a hand on my shoulder and spoke firmly. "Sarah, listen to me. Calm down. From now on, do not do anything on your own. Go home and act like nothing is wrong. Don't let her suspect a thing. I'm putting someone on Valerie 24/7. We are going to expose this devil in disguise." That night, when I returned home, I put on a mask of serenity, playing my part as the harmless, elderly mother-in-law. But inside, every fiber of my being was stretched taut like a wire. Dinner passed in a thick silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware against the plates. The air was heavy, as if a storm was about to break. Valerie feigned normality, asked about my glasses, even served me food. But I noticed that throughout the dinner, she kept glancing at the little white pharmacy bag. It was now placed on the highest shelf in the kitchen, in an almost reverent spot, yet loaded with suspicion, as if it didn't hold vitamins, but a precious poison. Was she afraid the bag would disappear, or that someone would discover the secret it held after dinner? Valerie put Emily to bed. The girl was fussy tonight for some reason. She insisted that her stepmother read her one story after another. Just one more, Aunt Valerie, the one about the princess in the tower. Emily's sweet voice drifted from the bedroom. I sat stiffly on the living room sofa, pretending to watch a boring TV show, but my hearing was sharp, not missing a sound, and my eyes were fixed on the half-open kitchen door. My heart was pounding, each beat reminding me of the dangerous mission ahead. I had to know what was inside that bag. Finally. Valerie's patience ran out. I heard her tell the girl, annoyed, "Go to sleep already. You're being naughty." Then, the sound of the girl's door slamming. A moment later, I heard the bathroom door open, and then the sound of water running in the shower. This was it. It was my chance. I took a deep breath, tried to calm my frantic heart, and stood up carefully. My steps were as light as a cat's, gliding over the wooden floor without a sound. The kitchen was dark. Only a faint strip of light from the street lamp outside came through the window, distorting the shapes of familiar objects and making them unsettling. I didn't dare turn on the light, afraid the sudden glow would alert Valerie. The shelf was too high for me. Groping in the dark, I found the small stool that was always in the corner. I dragged it carefully, held my breath, and climbed up slowly, trying not to let it creak. My fingers trembled as I touched the paper bag. Inside was a plain, unmarked cardboard box, completely white. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside rested an amber glass bottle, the kind used for chemicals. It had no label, no name, just a series of blurry numbers printed on the base, almost illegible. Next to the bottle was a piece of paper, folded in four, that looked like an insert. I unfolded it quickly and held it up to the small halo of light. It was full of medical terms I barely understood. But there were a few words in bold that chilled my blood. Acute respiratory failure, sudden cardiac arrest, irreversible neurological damage. And at the bottom of the page, underlined, a warning, special use, overdose fatal. A shiver ran down my spine. My hands shook so much, I almost dropped the bottle. There it was. This was her murder weapon. I placed the bottle and the paper on the kitchen table, trembling as I took out the phone Carter had told me to always carry. The screen lit up the room with a ghostly blue light. I had to take several photos because my hands were shaking too much. The images came out blurry, out of focus. "Calm down, Sarah, for Michael," I repeated to myself. Finally, I managed to take a few clear photos of the bottle, the serial number, and the text on the paper. Just as I was putting the phone back in my pocket, a sound froze me. The shower water stopped. My heart stopped with it. Everything fell apart. I quickly put the bottle and paper back in the box, put them back inside the bag, and placed it exactly where it had been. I got off the stool and pushed it back under the table, just as a shadow appeared in the kitchen doorway, silent as a ghost. "Not in bed yet?" "Mom, what are you doing in the dark?" Valerie's voice was cold, sharp, without the usual fake sweetness. I jumped, my heart about to burst from my chest. I spun around, trying to force a smile that must have looked completely twisted and pathetic. I pointed to the faucet, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "Oh, I was thirsty. I was just getting a glass of water to help me sleep." To support my lie, I reached out a shaky hand, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water. Valerie said nothing. She just stood there, in the dark, staring at me. I couldn't see her expression clearly, but I felt her sharp gaze, like a blade, scanning every inch of my skin, as if trying to find a crack in my lie. The silence stretched on, so tense I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. Then, she took a step forward and walked past me. She didn't look at me again. She reached up, took the paper bag from the shelf, held it for a moment. She shot me one last look, a look full of meaning, and then turned, walking straight towards her and Michael's bedroom. I heard the dry click of the lock. She had locked the door. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the cold glass in my hands. I knew I would not sleep that night. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was even more tense. There were no more sweet smiles, just a watchful silence. She watched me. She followed my every move, from the way I held my coffee cup to the way I spoke to Emily. Her inquisitive gaze was like a spotlight, searching for any sign of falsehood. I knew she suspected me. While Valerie was in the shower, I took the chance to go into her room. I grabbed my phone and sent the message I had written the night before, when I couldn't sleep. A short message, but loaded with urgency. "I need to see you. It's very important." I sent it to Carter. Less than a minute later, the phone vibrated. His reply was just as brief. 10 a.m., the Promenade Cafe, in the back corner. I had to invent an excuse to leave the house. I put on my coat and went down to the living room, where Valerie was cleaning. "I'm going to see Catherine, a friend from church. I haven't seen her in a long time. She's been calling me," I said, trying to sound casual. Valerie stopped what she was doing and looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. "A friend? I don't remember you ever mentioning her." My heart skipped a beat, but I already had the answer ready. "Oh, dear, I have many friends. You couldn't possibly know all of them. She just moved back to the city." I smiled, hoping the smile looked kind and harmless. "I won't be long. I'll stop by the church on the way, to pray a little for Michael." That last line seemed to work. The suspicion in her eyes softened. She even took a few dollars from her wallet and offered them to me. "Take care, Mom. Take this, in case you want to buy something." Any other time, that gesture might have been a sign of affection, but now, it just felt like a handout, a way of reasserting that she still had control over me. The Promenade Cafe was on a busy street. The bustle of people, the music, the clinking of cups, created the perfect noise to cover a secret conversation. Carter was already waiting for me at the most secluded table, his back to the entrance. He was wearing casual clothes, looking like any other employee on his lunch break. I sat down, my heart still pounding from nerves. I didn't wait for him to speak. I took out my phone, opened the gallery, and showed him the photos I had taken the night before. "Here it is. This is what she's using to poison Michael," I whispered, my voice trembling. Carter took the phone, and his eyes, trained for investigation, narrowed as he zoomed in on every detail of the image. His face hardened instantly as he read the words on the insert. He muttered the name of a chemical I couldn't even pronounce. "I know this compound," he said, his voice low and firm, placing the phone on the table. "Propofol. It's on the list of specially controlled substances. It's normally only used in hospitals for general anesthesia. A regular person can't get it without special permission, unless it's through an illegal channel." Trembling, I told him everything that had happened the night before, from the moment I snuck into the dark kitchen, the terror I felt reading those deadly words, to the tense confrontation with Valerie, and the razor-sharp look she gave me. Carter listened in silence, drumming his fingers on the table, never taking his eyes off me for a second. When I finished speaking, he nodded. "These photos are very important, Sarah. They are powerful evidence. but it's still indirect. She can deny it, say the medicine belongs to someone else, or that you're slandering her. To incriminate someone this cunning, we have to catch her in the act." He leaned forward and lowered his voice. "From now on, this is the plan. We must act quickly and with extreme caution." He laid out a 3-step plan, clear and precise, like a military operation. First, you, Sarah. Your role is the most important, and also the most dangerous. You must maintain absolute secrecy and behave as if nothing has changed. Watch Valerie's every move. Pay special attention to how she prepares the medicines and her daily routine. You have to become our eyes inside that house. Second, Dr. Miller. As soon as I leave here, I will contact him officially as a police inspector. His testimony, along with Michael's blood work, will give us the legal basis to request surveillance and an urgent search warrant from the court. And finally, me. I will launch an undercover investigation into everything related to Valerie, her finances, relationships, and personal background. We'll check every bank account, every credit card transaction, every debt she has. "People like her," Carter said, with a cold look. "They always do it for money. We will find her motive." Before I left, Carter took something out of his pocket. It was a black pen, seemingly normal. "It's a hidden recorder," he explained. "If she says anything suspicious, if she admits anything, even something small, press this little button on the top of the pen, but only use it if you are completely sure it's safe. It can be a double-edged sword." That afternoon, while I was making dinner, my phone vibrated with an unknown number. I ran to the bathroom and answered. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. This is Miller." The doctor's voice was low and rushed. "Inspector Carter has already contacted me. I gave him all the necessary documents. I also saw the photo you sent him. Just as I suspected. It's propofol, a very potent anesthetic used in surgery. Using it every day in small doses, even if it doesn't cause immediate death, slowly destroys the central nervous system. It's like a gradual poisoning. You must be very, very careful." That night, as I sat at the table, I felt like an actress playing the most important role of her life. I watched Valerie feed Michael his oatmeal, and then I saw it. She stealthily took an unlabeled bottle from her apron pocket, took a glass dropper, drew up a little of the clear liquid, and I, with quick movements, poured a few drops into my son's bowl before stirring it well. It all happened right before my eyes, just an arm's length away. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my skin until it bled. I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. I swallowed my tears. I swallowed the rage boiling inside me, and I smiled, a smile that I'm sure must have looked hideous. From that night on, every meal became mental torture. I had to smile, pretend everything was fine, while watching my daughter-in-law put poison in my son's food with my own eyes. The recorder Carter gave me was always in my coat pocket, cold and heavy, a reminder of the dangerous role I was playing. A few days later, Carter's investigation began to bear fruit. The pressure started to build. In the morning, while I was mopping the floor, Valerie got a call. I pretended to be busy with a potted plant, but I strained my ears to listen. "What? A detailed statement of recent credit card activity, but why is there a request from the authorities?" Valerie's voice sounded surprised at first. Then it turned irritated and worried. She hung up, her face hard. She didn't say a word all day. She just paced around the house, and her look towards me was no longer just inquisitive. It was tinged with hostility. She was starting to suspect that I was the cause of these problems. In the afternoon, the tension reached its peak. A man in an elegant suit, carrying a leather briefcase, knocked on the door unexpectedly. Valerie opened it and, without telling me, introduced him. It was Mr. Peterson, her personal lawyer. He was here to help the family sort out some important paperwork. In the living room, The lawyer spread a thick folder of papers on the table. Valerie sat next to Michael. She took my son's limp hand, then she turned to me and spoke with fake sweetness. But every word had a crushing weight. "Mom, Mr. Peterson is here to help. You know that Michael's medical expenses, the medicines, and the hospital bills have increased. To facilitate payments and financial management in the future, I need you to sign this power of attorney. It will allow me to manage all his assets in his name, including this house and his savings." My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the final step in her plan. Once she had control of the assets, she would have no reason to keep Michael alive. "No," I said, without thinking. I tried to regain my composure and made an excuse. Something this big, involving my son's inheritance, should wait until Michael is more conscious. Shouldn't it? How can we decide this now? Valerie's eyes narrowed. The smile on her face vanished, leaving a cold, ruthless expression. More conscious. Did you not hear the doctor? His condition is only going to get worse. He is never getting better, Mom. Her voice was sharp as a knife. We have to do this while we can. You don't have to do much. Just help me hold his hand and put his thumbprint right here. Never. I refused firmly and stood up. As long as I am alive, I will not let anyone touch my son's assets when he is in no condition to decide. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, like a guitar string. The lawyer looked at me uncomfortably, then at Valerie, and quickly put the papers back in his briefcase. "Very well, Mrs. Vargas. Perhaps we should discuss this another time." After he hurried out, Valerie stood up and planted herself in front of me. There was no mask anymore. "You are stopping me from taking care of my husband," she muttered. Her eyes sparked with rage. "What do you think you're doing? You're just a senile old woman. Stay out of my business." That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. Valerie's threat echoed in my head. She was out of patience. She was going to act soon. Around 2 a.m, when the house was submerged in a deathly silence, I heard a faint click from Michael's room, and then the barely audible creak of the floorboards. A mother's instinct screamed at me that something was wrong. I slipped out of my room, holding my breath, barefoot on the cold floor. I hid behind the thick hallway wall and peeked through the crack of the half-open door into my son's room. The dim light of the night lamp illuminated a scene so horrific, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Valerie was standing next to Michael's bed. She was wearing blue latex gloves. In one hand, she held a syringe, full of a clear liquid. She was carefully tapping the cylinder to remove the small air bubbles, with a skill that made me shiver. She was about to inject it directly into the IV line placed in Michael's hand. She was going to do it. Tonight, all my thoughts, all the plans I had made with Carter, vanished from my head. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't let her kill my son. Overcome by fear and an instinctive fury, I ran into the room and screamed with all my strength. "Stop!" Valerie jumped, spinning around, her eyes wide with terror. In her panic, she dropped the syringe on the floor. The cylinder shattered, and the clear liquid spilled, forming a small puddle on the wooden floor. My scream also startled Michael awake. He opened his eyes and looked at the scene in confusion, but within a second, the demon inside Valerie woke up. The panic disappeared, giving way to rage and a cunning malice. She looked at me with fury, and then suddenly burst into heartbreaking sobs, screaming in a pained voice, playing her part to perfection. "Mom, what are you doing to Michael? Help neighbors. My mother-in-law is trying to kill her own son." She pointed to the broken syringe and the puddle on the floor, screaming between sobs and feigned desperation. "She wanted to inject my husband with poison. I caught her just in time. Help, please." Her voice echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Doors began to open, and several neighbors, still in their pajamas, ran towards our house. They froze when they saw the scene. Me, Motionless and pale as a ghost, Valerie, crying inconsolably by the bed, looking like a helpless victim, and Michael, my son, looking at me with fear and confusion, understanding nothing. The trap had been sprung, but not on Valerie, on me. To everyone, I was now the guilty one, a cruel mother-in-law, trying to kill her own son. I could barely stammer. It's not what it looks like. But my words were lost in Valerie's theatrical sobs. I had no choice but to back down and tell the neighbors it was all a family misunderstanding, begging them to return to their homes. But deep down, I knew I was cornered. When the last neighbor left, shooting me a suspicious look, Valerie turned to me with a triumphant smile. "See, old woman," she whispered, with venom. "Nobody believes you. Now everyone thinks you're crazy, that you're an unhinged mother-in-law who wants to kill her son. You'd better shut your mouth and stay out of my business." With that, she turned and left, leaving me alone in the living room, enveloped in a feeling of defeat and despair. But that despair only lasted a few seconds. I looked towards the room where Michael lay, his eyes still full of fear. I couldn't give up. Not now. While Valerie was busy cleaning up the scene she had just staged, I ran to the bathroom and locked the door. With trembling hands, I dialed Carter's number. "Carter, it all went wrong." I sobbed into the phone, speaking in an anguished whisper. "She turned the tables. She accused me of attempted murder. Now everyone thinks Sarah, listen to me calmly." Carter's voice boomed, firm and full of authority, cutting through my panic. "She made her move. She cornered herself. This is not a defeat. This is our opportunity. Listen carefully, Sarah. Tomorrow, we end this." Carter explained his plan to me, step by step. A bold plan, risky, but it was the only path we had left. The next morning, I woke up with iron determination. I went downstairs, pretending to be exhausted, devastated by the shock of the previous night. Valerie looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. Just then, according to Carter's plan, the house landline rang. I picked up the receiver, pretended to listen for a moment, and then spoke loudly, loud enough for Valerie, who was in the kitchen, to hear me clearly. "What did you say? I have to go to the police station to give an additional statement about the traffic accident last week. What a hassle." All right, I understand. I'll be right there." I hung up the phone with a resigned sigh. I hurriedly put on my coat and said to Valerie, "I have to go to the police station for a while. I probably won't be back until noon. Stay home and take good care of Michael." Valerie nodded, a satisfied smile flashing across her face. A glint of triumph shone in her eyes, which this time she didn't even try to hide. "Yes, Mom. You go ahead. I'll take care of everything." She thought she had gotten rid of me, the last obstacle. But I wasn't really going to any police station. I walked straight out of the house, walking quickly to the end of the street, where Carter's old truck was parked discreetly under a large tree. I opened the door and got in. Inside wasn't just Carter, but also a set of small screens, showing images from different angles. They were all connected to a micro camera that Carter, in the chaos of the previous night, had a colleague, posing as a neighbor, install. The camera was perfectly hidden, inside the eye of an old teddy bear that Emily always left on the shelf. I watched the screen, holding my breath. My heart was pounding. Just as Carter had predicted, Valerie's overconfidence had made her lower her guard. Barely 5 minutes after I left, she began to act. The footage showed Valerie entering Michael's room, locking the door from the inside. She drew the curtains, plunging the room into a dim, sickly light. Then, she took a very familiar brown glass bottle from her purse and a new syringe. She wasn't hiding anymore. She acted calmly, coldly, like a nurse performing her daily routine. She drew a dose of the clear liquid into the syringe. I saw her lean close to Michael's ear, who was sleeping deeply under the effect of the previous night's sedative. Her lips moved, whispering something, Although I couldn't hear, the cruel, satisfied smile on her face let me imagine the evil of her words. Maybe something like, "My burden is almost over," or, "Goodbye, you useless thing." Then, she took the syringe and moved towards the IV line connected to my son's arm. My heart stopped. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. Tears blurred my vision. Carter put a firm hand on my shoulder. "Just a little longer, Sarah. We have to catch her in the act."
Che saison va pai.
Ahead. The instant the needle touched the plastic connector of the IV, ready to inject the lethal poison into my son's vein. Carter grabbed the transmitter and yelled with a commanding voice, "Now!" I didn't wait another second. I jumped out of the truck and ran desperately towards the house. At the same time, 2 plainclothes police officers emerged from a nearby alley, cutting off her escape from behind. I threw open the front door. Without worrying about my shoes, I sprinted up the stairs, screaming with all my pent-up fury. "Valerie, what are you doing? Hearing me!" Valerie jumped. She spun around, her face pale with terror. She couldn't believe I was back. Nervously, she tried to pull the syringe out of the IV to get rid of the evidence, but it was too late. The bedroom door burst open as the police officers stormed in. Valerie froze, with the syringe still connected to Michael's IV line. They had caught her in the act. It was all recorded. Her face, once beautiful, was now disfigured by horror, anger, and defeat. Knowing she could no longer deny anything, her mask of the devoted wife shattered. The real Valerie came out. She screamed like a madwoman, in a voice so high-pitched it sounded like scraping metal. "Yes, it was me. That piece of trash should have died years ago. He is my damn burden." She pointed at me, her eyes bloodshot. "This is all your fault, you nosy old woman. If you hadn't interfered, this would all be over." Her cold, ruthless confession was fully recorded by the hidden camera and the police microphone. I didn't hear anything else. Everything became a buzz in my ears. I just remember running to the bed and hugging Michael with all my strength. My son had woken up, perhaps from the moment I screamed. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the scene of his wife, the woman he once loved, being handcuffed by the police. Then, 2 tears rolled down his sunken cheeks. Chaos erupted suddenly. While 2 officers tried to control the unhinged beast that was Valerie, one of the younger ones let his guard down, loosening his grip. In an instant, Valerie seized the moment and, like a cornered animal, bit down hard on the officer's arm. He yelled in pain and, as a reflex, let her go. It was enough. Valerie shoved me violently as I tried to block her path. I lost my balance and fell onto Michael's wheelchair. She shot out of the room like a hurricane, running for the stairs, desperate to escape. "Stop, Valerie! Stop!" Carter shouted, his voice firm, but she didn't listen. The fear of being arrested had blinded her. In her desperation, she didn't notice the puddle of clear liquid on the floor, right at the top of the stairs. The poison spilled from the broken bottle the night before. The trap she herself had set for me. The sharp heel of her shoe slipped on the liquid. A heartbreaking, high-pitched scream tore through the silence. I looked up and only managed to see her body lose its balance, teeter in the air for a terrifying instant, and then fall, tumbling down the wooden steps. There was a series of chilling, dry thuds. Thud, 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 until her body came to rest on the stair landing, in a twisted, unnatural position. The silver bracelet she used to wear, a gift from Michael, flew off her wrist, rolled a few inches, and lay still on the cold floor, shining ironically. An absolute silence enveloped the house. We all stood frozen, stunned by what had just happened. The noise made Emily run out of her room, scared. I hugged her tight and covered her eyes so she wouldn't see that terrible image. My heart was pounding furiously in my chest. Part of me was horrified by the tragedy, but another, darker part felt a strange sense of relief. Justice, in a cruel way, had been served. Carter was the first to react. He ran down the stairs, knelt beside Valerie, and placed 2 fingers on her neck. "She's still breathing. Call an ambulance. Now," he ordered the young officer, who was still paralyzed in shock. At the hospital, the same place that hours before had been the stage for Valerie's theater, her fate would now be decided. The diagnosis was a sentence delivered by fate. Multiple fractures, cervical spinal cord injury, severe head trauma. She was alive, but she would be paralyzed for life, unable to speak or move. She would spend the rest of her days trapped in the prison of her own body, exactly as she had condemned my son for 5 years. After the doctors managed to clear the poison from Michael's system in time, my son was out of danger. I sat by his bed, in another room, far from where Valerie was. My son's face was still pale, but his eyes, those eyes that were once empty, were now clear again. He looked at me with a lucid gaze, aware of everything around him. When we were alone in the room, I took his thin hand tightly. With a trembling voice, I told him the whole truth, starting from the first suspicion, 5 years ago. I told him about Valerie's cold gaze in the hospital, the mysterious white pills, Dr. Miller's warning, the bottle of poison hidden in the paper bag, and the cruel plan of the wife he once loved and trusted blindly. Michael listened in silence, with no expression on his face. But then, tears began to run down his cheeks, hot, slipping down to his temples and soaking the pillow. They were tears of pain for the betrayal, of bitterness for the cruel truth, and also of relief, for finally being free from the nightmare that had lasted too long. When Emily shyly entered the room, she stood in the doorway, looking at her father with fear. Michael moved with difficulty and held out his trembling hand to her. It was a small gesture, but for us, it meant more than a miracle. Emily burst into tears, no longer of fear, but of happiness. She ran to him, hugged his arm, and hid her face, sobbing. Michael looked at me, his eyes full of tears and his voice choked with sobs, weak but clear. "Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for not believing you." I shook my head, my own eyes full of tears, and pressed his trembling hand to my cheek, feeling the faint warmth of life. "It's okay, my son. It's all in the past now. The important thing is that we are together again." The 3 of us hugged, our bodies exhausted after the storm, crying in the midst of peace and relief. The golden light of the sunset streamed through the window, warm and soft, like a promise of a new beginning, a future that we would rebuild together from the ashes. 6 months passed, slowly, like a thawing river after an endless winter, carrying away the wounds and cleansing the memories of the horror. Little by little, my family's life found its way again, like a tree shattered by the storm that begins to sprout new buds. Valerie, a name we barely mentioned, was convicted in absentia of attempted murder and fraud. Fate had locked her in her own body, under strict medical supervision in a secure hospital for criminals. All of Michael's assets, the very ones she had tried to steal with so many tricks, were returned intact. But the most valuable thing we recovered wasn't the money, but life and hope. The complete removal of the poison from his system freed his mind and body. Although the physical therapy sessions were painful, Michael never complained. He held on with iron determination, with the will of someone given a second chance at life. Although he still had to use a wheelchair, he could already move his arms, hold a spoon, and speak with a voice that grew clearer and stronger every day. And the most beautiful thing of all, his smile. The one that had been missing from his face for so long I had almost forgotten what it looked like, had returned, radiant and warm. Our home was no longer shrouded in the gloomy, suffocating atmosphere of lies and fear. Instead, It was filled with the sounds of life. It's Emily's crystal-clear laughter as she plays in the garden, the soft, classical music that Michael loves, playing from the old speaker, and the aroma of roast lamb, of the dishes I cook in the kitchen, the smell of love and family unity. Every weekend, I take my son and granddaughter out for a walk, to breathe fresh air, to remember that the world out there is still beautiful and worth living in. Today, we went to Central Park, the green heart of our city. I push Michael's wheelchair under the jacaranda trees, which are in full bloom. The purple flowers fall gently to the ground, forming a delicate carpet. Emily runs ahead of us, with a strawberry ice cream in her hand, her hair flying in the wind. Every now and then, she runs back, stands on her tiptoes, and carefully gives her father a small spoonful of ice cream. Michael smiles, opens his mouth, and pretends to wince from the cold, which makes the girl let out a mischievous laugh. Michael looks up at the branches, where the sun's rays filter through the leaves and dance on his daughter's face. He takes a deep breath, filling his chest with air, and then turns to me, his eyes shining with pure joy. "Mom," he says with emotion. I've never seen the sky look so beautiful and so blue as it does today. I understood what he meant. For 5 years, the sky he saw was nothing more than a thick gray of hopelessness, a fog of poison. Now, finally, he could see the blue of hope. We stop by a large fountain, where the water sparkles in the sun. Emily climbs onto her father's lap. She talks non-stop about her school field trip last week, about how she saw a squirrel jump from branch to branch, and how a bird stole her classmate's sandwich. Michael listens to her patiently, his eyes full of tenderness, occasionally stroking her soft hair, that sacred bond between father and daughter, which had seemed lost, now burns stronger than ever. I sit on the bench next to them, silently watching this simple, precious moment. My tears well up again, but this time they are not tears of pain or fear, but of complete happiness. We have weathered the storm. We have seen the worst of evil and betrayal, but in the end, family love, my son's strength, and perhaps the slightly reckless courage of a mother overcame it all. I gently place my hand on my son's shoulder and squeeze it affectionately. Michael turns his head, extends his hand, firmer now, and takes mine. He says nothing, just smiles at me. That smile tells me that, even though the road ahead is still difficult, even though recovery is still long as we are together, 3 generations, 3 souls who survive the tempest, everything will be okay. Peace is not the absence of storms, but the calm of the soul while passing through them. And now, peace has truly returned to our small home. The story you just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes, I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage will lead us to better days. Right now, on the end screen, I will leave 2 of the most beloved stories from Elderly Stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.